And I see a steady stream of folks joining. We will kick this off in just a minute or so.
So it is recording.
It is recording. Okay, looks like we have around 78 participants and counting. I'm John Couch. I'm the Chief of the Office of Court Improvement. It is great to have you all here today. We have a very exciting program lined up by ATOD on a very important topic. We're going to hear some success stories that this has been a big topic of interest from folks throughout the state. So I'm going to turn it over to Marcia Elder, the lead staff for the court's opioids and stimulants response.
Alrighty, well, good day, everyone. And the official title is on your screen there, Lived Experience Success Stories, Participants in Treatment and Recovery. And the three presenters for today are noted Mark Perrino, Jacqueline LaBelle, and Samantha Rule. And you will meet them in just a moment. A few housekeeping notes, so to speak. If you lose connection, just simply log right back in. Some people have had a little bit of difficulty lately with the Zoom connection, and it's very easy to come right back in. Questions, be thinking of your questions of the presenters, and you'll see at the bottom of your screen, if you hover your cursor there, then it will show the Q&A box, and you just simply type your questions in there. And then when we get to that point of the program, we'll be delighted to ask them on your behalf. And so those who are seeking continuing education credits, continuing judicial education, and continuing legal education credits are applied for this program. And we will have some exciting announcements at the end of the program. But without further ado, I'm totally delighted to introduce to you Mark Perrino, who is the president of the American Association for the Treatment of Opioid Dependence, or ATOD. And he has been involved in delivery of healthcare and substance abuse treatment since 1974. So he's got a tremendous amount of experience in this field, and we're fortunate to have him with us here today. Among his distinctions is having served as president of the National Development and Research Institutes, and also having served as chair of the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment Consensus Panel for State Methadone Treatment Guidelines, and the first treatment improvement protocol published for national distribution. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn the program over to Mark, who has organized it and our presenters for today. So welcome, Mark Perrino.
Thank you, Marcia. Always a pleasure to be with you. And this continues our partnership with the Florida Office of State Courts. I'm certainly grateful to John as well for his leadership. This has been a continued piece of work since we convened our conference in Orlando in October of 2019. And I'm very grateful for the continued partnership that we have. And ATOD, for those of you who don't know, represents the OTPs in the United States. We have 30 state chapters with over 1,200 members. And we also work in conjunction with our associates abroad through the World Federation for the Treatment of Opioid Dependence. And that, of course, puts us in a working relationship with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and also with the World Health Organization. It's also important to point out our long-term partnership with NAMA Recovery, especially with its president, Zach Talbot, who's a terrific person and has been a wonderful partner to ATOD. And he helped arrange for the speakers that you're going to hear from this afternoon. And so with that, I'm going to be introducing our speakers, and I'm very grateful for their participation, both Jacqueline LaBelle, Jackie, and Samantha Rule, And I can tell you that Samantha will be the second speaker. So let me just give you a brief description of Jackie, who's originally from Fort Lauderdale, and her history of opioid use disorder goes back to a pre-monitoring days in Florida when she had 6 different physicians and 6 different pharmacies. And she served as a veterinary technician, so she had access to syringes and she certainly knew how to use them. The decision to begin methadone treatment, in her own words, saved her life, and she became a certified support specialist in the state of Florida and worked for Project Save Lives. And then I will introduce Samantha when Jackie has concluded her remarks. From my point of view, they both have remarkable stories. I know that I've spent my career explaining what methadone maintenance is, what medications are for the treatment of opioid use disorder. And in my judgment, no one better tells the story than the patient themselves. And since I have worked in a program for 18 years, I have enormous respect for the patients, and it is my pleasure to introduce Jackie to you.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate the introduction. And so I'd love to share my story of methadone and my experience with it and my story of recovery. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I put together that kind of goes over my story and gives us some talking points. And so if you'll just bear with me, I'll go ahead and open that up and we can share our screen. Give me just one moment. Okay.
Let me know if you need anything.
Okay. Share my PowerPoint. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes, and if you just go to the slide.
Okay. So I'd like to start by saying that, you know, recovery is different for everyone, of course. It's as unique as the individual. And so there's a lot of reasons why people want to share their story. And so here, from one of my favorite authors, Brene Brown, it says, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show when you can't control the outcome. And vulnerability is our most accurate measurement of courage. So this is basically my story. So I'm just going to kind of read through it. I won't necessarily have to go word for word, but just kind of so you get a sense of my history and what led me into my addiction. So as Mark was saying, I grew up in South Florida. I graduated high school in 2002. I was involved in a car accident as a teenager, and I did suffer some back pain and back injuries. So an older boyfriend of mine was on Loratabs. So he began giving me those and said, hey, this will help with your pain. I knew nothing of addiction. I knew nothing of the sort. So I began taking those and I realized, wow, I really like these. They make me feel great. I quickly built up a tolerance to where I was having to take 2 to 3 and 4 at a time to get the same effect. Soon thereafter, I was introduced by him to a drug called Oxycontin. And it was new on the scene around then, and I loved it. It made me feel comfortable in my own skin. I was comfortably numb. He also showed me how to, at the time, this was prior to them doing the anti-abusive to where you couldn't crush it up. Originally, you were able to, you could take the coating off, of the pill, which was the extended release feature, by rubbing it with a wet washcloth or using your saliva and the inside of your t-shirt, and you could wipe away the coating. And then you could crush up the pill and snort it. So he showed me how to do that. My addiction got stronger and stronger, and my tolerance built up. Then he showed me about all these MRIs and all these great doctors, and introduced me to all these pill mill, quote unquote, doctors. And this was prior, like Mark said, prior to the prescription monitoring program. So at one point I had a day planner, and I would write down what doctor went to what pharmacy, so I wouldn't get it mixed up. So at one point I had 6 different doctors at 6 different pharmacies. The pharmacies were just as guilty and in on it too. They were making a lot of money with little regard for the lives they were destroying. The doctors and the pharmacies were cash only. They would fill my prescription bottle. I even had one pharmacist who would fill my prescription bottle with 2 to 4 pills so that I could go out to the parking lot and go snort my pills. That he knew I was doing that, while he would finish filling my ridiculous amounts of prescriptions of these lethal narcotics. I had even had some doctors that I would meet in the parking lot at night. I'd jump into his car, hand him $300 cash. And I specifically remember it was a Mercedes S-Class silver 2-door. And he would pull out his prescription pad out of the glove box and say, okay, the usual, right? Which was always 200. And these numbers are accurate. 240 to 360 of 30 milligram roxycodone. 80 milligram Oxycontin, 120 somas, 92 milligram Xanax, 96 milligram Dilaudid. And that's just to start. I would even do sexual favors for doctors if I was running low on funds that month. Then we would even call them sponsors, as we used to call them, which was an individual that would front the money to cover the cost of the doctor's visit and prescriptions, which was usually in the thousands, would either asking for sexual favors or half of your prescriptions because they were addicted as well to the drugs. I remember feeling like I was part of some illicit or, incredible club of these people who knew all these secrets, and I had all the connections, and I felt so important and so cool, and like I had the hookup, and I knew where all the pharmacies were and where all the doctors were. So it actually made me feel like, I was amazing. South Florida was really a playground at that point in time for the addicted. And I remember towards the end, before the Fed started raiding and shutting everyone down, I remember seeing license plates from all over the Eastern Seaboard on people's cars, from Tennessee, Virginia, and Kentucky. Those are the main ones that I can remember the most seeing. And then, of course, our closest geographical neighbors, such as Georgia, Alabama, and Louisiana. And these were in parking lots in southern Fort Lauderdale or northern Miami at these pill mill doctors. I was even able to find a good pharmacy in Jacksonville, quote unquote, good pharmacy in Jacksonville, Florida, that would fill my narcotic prescriptions from Fort Lauderdale. So I was taking a monthly trip down to Fort Lauderdale to get like one of the last couple doctors that were still writing prescriptions before they got raided, and bring my prescriptions to Jacksonville, which of course was cash only too. Now, these doctors' offices and pharmacies would have Brinks trucks, armed guards come and pick up this cash daily, with armed security guards because of the amount of cash that was going through there. So this is what led to not only my massive physical dependence on opiates, but also led me down an even darker path of addiction. Fast forward a few years ago, I'm still doctor shopping, and I began working, like Mark said, as a veterinary technician. I started in the kennels and worked my way up as a vet tech. I loved the job, but it also gave me unlimited access to syringes. So since I knew how to draw blood from cats and dogs, and I knew how to administer IV medications, I began crushing up my pills and using the opiates IV. So fast forward, when the prescriptions became harder and harder to fill, and the number of doctors were dwindling that were willing to write these prescriptions because of all the raids, I was getting in withdrawals and not able to get the pills. So a friend told me about how this drug heroin and how it will take the withdrawal symptoms away, and it works just like those pills, and it's cheaper and easier to get. No more doctor's office waiting rooms, no more cash only pharmacies with lines out the door, and now I can get what I want with a quick phone call. So I went after heroin for quite some time. My very first of several attempts getting clean was at a Suboxone clinic in South Florida. Now, there was billboards popping up everywhere because all the pill mills have been shut down. So now these billboards are popping up saying, hey, addicted to opiates, come get on Suboxone, it'll help. So it was everywhere up and down I-95. So I went to the Suboxone doctor, and he treated it just like any other pill mill. I went and he wrote me the prescription, said, here's your medicine, I'll see you later. There was no meetings, there was no recovery program, there was no accountability, no nothing. Just give me your cash, here's your script, goodbye. Sound familiar? So I never really took them as prescribed, and I didn't take it serious, and I still didn't know what recovery was. So I'd sell my extra ones, trade them, take them just to get me by until I could get more painkillers or heroin. Fast forward, I moved up to Jacksonville, and still I hung on to that one doctor, like I said, still driving down monthly to get my prescription filled, and in between using Suboxone or heroin. And so in 2008, I met and fell in love with my husband. We met, and we were blessed with a baby boy in September 19, 2008. At that time, I explained to my OBGYN what I had been doing. I've been driving down to Fort Lauderdale. I'm taking pills. I'm running out short. I'm doing heroin in between. What can I do? So she educated me. I asked her for advice, and she gave me, guidance instead of judging me. So, I didn't want to spend half the month in withdrawals. So she told me about these options. She said, you can either keep taking the pills, but you have to take them as prescribed, and you can't run out, because if you go through withdrawal, baby feels withdrawal. Or I could take a medicine, this new medicine at the time called Suboxone, or I could take a medicine called Methadone. Now, Suboxone didn't have at the time the trials, and we didn't know the outcomes and the effects on mother and baby at the time because it was fairly new. But Methadone had been around for years, and we had tons of data. So I buried my head in books, and I learned all about it. And I said, you know what, I think Methadone might be my best bet. So I got involved in a Methadone clinic, and I began taking that. Fast forward, I had the baby, 9 months later, gave birth. He was happy, healthy. After 5 days of observation for signs of neonatal abstinence withdrawal symptoms, he showed no signs. After 5 days, we went home, and he's healthy as a horse. He's 12 years old. He's smart, happy, healthy, and thriving. And when he was about 3 or 4 years old, my disease really took a hold. I decided that I could stop taking methadone and I can get back on prescription painkillers. My disease told me that I could take it successfully as prescribed for my chronic back pain, and I'd be fine. I wouldn't have to go to a clinic anymore, and let's just go to the doctor. So I began doing that, which of course I was running out. It was a huge mistake. So I spent the next 5 years in the hell of active addiction. I began using IV heroin again, included IV crack cocaine and IV cocaine at this point. I was sleeping in my car, sleeping in trap houses, sleeping in abandoned houses, not going home or even showering for weeks at a time, almost dying many times via overdose, and all the dangerous situations I put myself in to get another fix. At that point, I welcomed death. I would wish the next shot would have been my last. I lived a miserable existence of getting as high as humanly possible and any way possible every day. I had suffered trauma as a child. So my ACE scores are very high from being molested as a child. So I had a lot of unresolved trauma and unresolved grief. At this point, my father told me he had already buried me. My family was worried, sick, and completely dismayed. So my husband and my mother went down to the courthouse and filed a Marchman Act. I was served papers for an upcoming court date, and I remember my husband buying me drugs every day, just enough so I wouldn't run off again and keep me out of withdrawal long enough just to get me into treatment. I managed to make it to the hearing for the Marchman court, and I had taken a little bit too much that morning, so I was nodding off in the courtroom up against my husband's shoulder and his arm. They were mortified and embarrassed and scared and lost and desperate to save me. And when it was my turn to speak to the judge, I stood up at the podium doing my best to keep my eyelids from falling and standing up straight. And the judge asked me if I wanted to go to treatment. And my reply was yes. I need help and I want help. Deep down in my soul, I knew I couldn't keep living this way. I was ready. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I missed my family. I missed my son. So I was ordered to treatment, but because of bed availability, I had to wait an entire week before I could go off to detox and then residential treatment. That week was spent buying just enough heroin to keep the withdrawals at bay. I snuck off the day before I was to report to detox, and I spent 2 days overdosing and getting high as possible before treatment. Had I had a bed available, this wouldn't have happened. But I'll touch on that in a little bit. I finally showed up at the detox ready. I was so ready for change. I spent the next 7 days abstinent for opiates, feeling absolutely physically awful. But mentally, I remember feeling so excited. I was like manically happy because I knew the hell of active addiction was finally over. I didn't have to live that way anymore. I didn't have to go back, and I was done. I was free. On the 7th day of residential detox at the treatment center, the treatment center came to pick me up and take me into the inpatient treatment assessment, and I was still feeling absolutely miserable. My skin hurt, I was crawling, I had runny nose, sneezing, yawning, restless legs. I felt like I had a fever of 106, but was equally freezing. I was just miserable. During my intake process, they asked me if I was interested in taking any kind of maintenance medications. So I immediately thought back to how unsuccessful I was with the Suboxone, and I could never quit cold turkey, despite many attempts of laying on the sofa miserable for a week or two. And they said they had methadone therapy. So as a last-ditch effort to save my life and try to feel better, I said, yes, I would love to begin methadone maintenance treatment. I went down to the dosing window, spoke with the nurse, described my symptoms and history of use, and I took my dose of methadone. I went and sat down outside with the sun shining on my face, and the dose finally kicked in, and I felt great. I felt like a normal human being again. I was so ecstatic because I knew that in that moment, listening to the cars driving past me, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin, feeling every single withdrawal symptom begin to fade away, I was finally free. I was finally myself for once in my life. My recovery began that day on April 30th, 2016. I went to an inpatient residential treatment center for 45 days, learning about this disease called addiction. I took that time in treatment and utilized it as a sort of college where I would learn about all the hows, the whys, and the how comes. Why can't I just be normal? Or as my mom would say, why can't you just quit? Just stop doing drugs. Just stop. Why do I feel this way? What's wrong with me? Why me? Why can't I just be normal? Why can't I just not use drugs? I learned all about what codependency was, what co-occurring disorders were, my mental health, anger management, my resentments, how drugs affect the brain, best practices for treatment. I worked the 12 steps, and I dived just headfirst into the recovery community service and giving back. I wanted to reach my hand out to the next one that was still sick and suffering in active addiction and help them find their pathway to recovery. I learned so much in treatment, and I had epiphanies practically every day, saying to myself in group or in class, like, that's why I can't just stop. And, oh, that's why I do what I do. Or that's why I have to use substances to cope. I didn't have coping mechanisms. I learned so much about how to handle my stresses of life and living life on life's terms. I was so grateful to be there, just to have a bed to sleep in and food in my belly. I would look at the empty bed next to me thinking how sad I felt, because I knew that girl could have been me and was still out there doing and using. And if I could only help one more person get into treatment and learn about this thing called recovery. So fast forward from there, I became certified as a certified peer support specialist, working for Project Save Lives in Jacksonville, Florida, where they put certified peers in the emergency room departments. So what we do, our goal is to reduce recidivism into the hospital and the ERs. So we would, if an overdose victim comes in, we would go in after they're stable, would go in and tell our story and say, hey, I've been in this bed. I've been where you're at. I understand. I know what withdrawals feel like. I know what it's like to suffer. I know what it's like to be in addiction. I'm in recovery. This is my pathway, but we can try to figure out yours. What do you, and using motivational interviewing, and we would help them get treatment. I would literally lift them to detox that night, or Uber them to detox that night. If they wanted, then we would keep up with them for a period of 90 days, calling them weekly, following up with them. And the numbers spoke for themselves. We were really helping save a lot of lives, giving out Narcan and training. So Project Save Lives is always near and dear to my heart. Having peers in the ER, I wish we had peers everywhere. Had I met a peer in my active addiction, I know for a fact I would have probably gotten to recovery much sooner. So now I just wanted to touch on a little bit about myths and misconceptions about methadone, because this is the thing people love to just say. Methadone is this seems to be still this dirty, bad word. People just don't know much about it. I've had 2 children on methadone. My first child did not require anything. He was home after the 5th day. My second child, he's now 4 years old. He was in the NICU for 4 weeks. So every pregnancy is different. Every baby's different. I was as consistent and stable as I was with the first one. But this one just didn't, he required more help. But pregnancy and MAT is a whole nother story. But back to myths and misconceptions. So some of the myths, methadone causes drowsiness and sedation. All people sometimes feel drowsy or tired. Patients on a stabilized dose of methadone will not feel any more drowsy or sedated than is normal. So when you're first getting stable, it could make you a little sleepy until you get used to it. There's so many factors, your history of use, your tolerance, all those things. But does it make you high or drowsy? Absolutely not. Well, I'm at a very stable dose. I've been on it for 5 years. I can drive. I can, all the different things. I just feel normal. I don't feel high. I don't feel low. I don't feel anything. I just feel normal. Another myth, the lower the dose of methadone, the better. So this was something I learned when I was pregnant on methadone. The dosage does not matter. Forget the number, forget the dosage. It's how are you feeling? Are your withdrawal symptoms at bay? Are you craving? If so, then we can up your dosage. If not, are you feeling sedated? Then let's lower it. When you're pregnant, a lot of times your blood's thickened, so you do need to go up on your dose a little bit, because you'll start to feel some withdrawal symptoms, which I did during my pregnancy. So the dose will reduce withdrawal symptoms, but the higher the doses are often needed for that blocking effect. So methadone does have a blocking effect on a stable dose. And most important is to cut the cravings for heroin use. And some of the facts I'd researched, most patients, and this is just like I said, numbers shouldn't matter, the milligrams shouldn't matter. Most patients will need between 60 and 120 milligrams of methadone a day to stop using heroin. A few patients, however, will be between 5 to 10 milligrams. Others may need 100 and 200 milligrams a day in order to feel comfortable, especially with the synthetics we have now, such as fentanyl. It's so much more potent, but it doesn't have the same shelf life, so they're having to use more and more. So myth number 3, methadone is harmful to your immune system, especially with COVID. This has come up lately. Methadone does not damage the immune system. In fact, several studies have suggested that HIV positive patients who are taking methadone are healthier and live longer than those drug users who are not on methadone. And a lot of that has to do with being involved with an OTP, or opioid treatment provider. Being on methadone, you're constantly in contact with medical professionals. You're constantly being looked at every time you go in. How are you feeling? What are your symptoms? How are you doing? Oh, you got a headache? Well, what do you think's causing it? Or whatever the case may be. Hey, I got this weird rash on my arm. What do you think? I see a nurse every time I dose, so I get to talk to a medical professional, including the resources that are at clinics. And again, another myth, methadone will make you feel high. So we just kind of touched on that a little bit. But in a medically supervised treatment program at a therapeutic dose, methadone will not make you feel high. When you just begin your treatment, you may feel a little sleepy, lightheaded sensation for a few days, and may experience some other side effects while with dosage adjustment. With any medication that you can get from your doctor, for example, blood pressure medication may make you a little sleepy when you first start it. So that's with any medication. Within a few weeks, your body will develop a tolerance, and an initial feeling of sedation will soonly, you'll develop that tolerance. Soon you'll start to feel normal, and you'll have a reduced craving for opiates. Another myth, using methadone for a long time can destroy the thyroid gland, memory, and liver. Methadone isn't approved by FDA as a safe and effective drug for treating withdrawal symptoms in people with OUD. So long-term use of this drug is safe. Methadone does not damage internal organs like the kidneys, liver, pancreas, or intestines, as long as you take the prescribed amount. Also, it won't affect your ability for thinking or the ability to remember things correctly. So it is relatively safe medication, especially compared to a lot of other medicines to treat other ailments. So another myth is methadone causes your bones and teeth to rot. This is one of my favorites. Everybody seems to want to say this. It gets in your bones and it rots your teeth. The common methadone myth isn't true, but it's important to understand why it has been widely circulated. Dry mouth. Talk to any dentist about dry mouth. Dry mouth is a known side effect while taking methadone medication. With dry mouth, plaque can form more rapidly on the surface of your teeth. Unfortunately, having excess plaque can cause tooth decay and gum disease. And also, when we're in our active addiction, we're not practicing our best hygiene. So when we finally get in recovery and we're starting to notice these things like, hey, man, my tooth hurts, or hey, my teeth are rotting. When you're high all the time and you're under an active addiction, you're not noticing these things. So the dry mouth is the side effect from methadone, which can cause plaque, which can cause tooth decay, which then causes gum disease. So to protect your teeth while using methadone or any other medication, any medicine really, you need to observe basic dental hygiene routine, brushing your teeth and flossing daily, rinse your mouth with approved mouthwash, and of course seeing your dentist and getting your teeth examined and cleaned will reducing the amount of sugary foods you consume. You should always drink more water and keep your mouth moist while taking methadone. But if taking methadone and it feels like your bones are rotting, then it's because the amount of methadone is inadequate. Part of withdrawal symptom is your bones hurt. You ever hear somebody say, my bone feel like they're aching? That's part of a withdrawal symptom. So if you're feeling like your bones are rotting or aching, you may need an adjustment of your dosage. But the methadone does not get into your bones. So I'd love to add this slide here because this is active addiction. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. So, you know, we continue to enact the same rules or the same behaviors, but expecting different results. So we have to change the behaviors. We have to change the thought process to get better or different results. And I included a few graphs here. So the opioid receptor act.
And we're not hearing your audio, Jackie.
Almost immediately, but then wears off in less than 5 minutes, or less than 5 hours rather. Methadone, as you can see, slowly but surely climbs up and it stays stable. Buprenorphine is way down here and it stays stable. Now, Vivitrol, of course, doesn't have that receptor. So, methadone and opiates by the numbers. So the rise in opiate overdose deaths in America, nearly 500,000 people have died from an opioid overdose from 1999 to 2019. 500,000 people. 500,000. That could be your sister, your cousin, your friends, my friends. I lost the love of my life to a heroin overdose. She had just gotten out of treatment. Her tolerance was lower. She believed all the stigma about medication-assisted therapy, didn't think it was good, didn't want to take Suboxone or methadone. That's a cop-out, that's a crutch, didn't want to take it. And so in 2010, you can see that in 2013, you can see that synthetic opiates have hit the mark. So the percentage of patients who relapse on type 1 diabetes versus drug addiction versus hypertension and versus asthma, that kind of speaks for itself. Then this graph here, you can see the percentage of patients positive for opiates, opiate use while with or without methadone treatment. So on methadone versus the control, the opiate usage is way less. So I know I'm kind of running, long on time here, so I'll try to wrap this up real quick. This graph speaks for itself again from the CDC. The overdose death rates involving opiates from 1999 to 2019. So our death rates are climbing and we need access to treatments. This is also, again, why is addiction treatment evaluated differently? Both require ongoing care. Hypertension and addiction treatment, same thing. Why methadone maintenance works for me? It gives me accountability. I'm subject to drug screens. I get counselors. I have to show up. There's community resources. I get medical attention. There's counseling, peer support. You don't have to be in full withdrawal to start maintenance. Access to medical care, group support, resources. It's a long-acting medication. You all have to take it once a day. And it's taught me to show up for life. Helps cravings, has blocking effects. I can take it for as long as I need to. And if you do a proper tapering process, there's little to no withdrawal. So the takeaway, methadone saves lives. Access to methadone is paramount. We can work together to save more lives by allowing access to this life-saving medication. I work as a CRSS. I work directly with clients that are still struggling when they shouldn't be. They're craving, relapsing, and desperately wanting to recover. Allowing every avenue is the least we can do to help them help themselves. I choose to recover out loud so that those in addiction don't have to die in silence. Because storytelling and visual storytelling was put in the hands of everybody, we have all now become storytellers by LeVar Burton. And so that is the end of my little slideshow. And I hope that more and more patients, especially those involved in the court system, can have access to this life-saving medication. It saved my life. I'm a military wife. I'm an advocate. I'm at the soccer games with your kids. I'm cheering our kids on. I'm in the school pickup lines. I'm in the community with you. And, so we're not just, we're not bad people. We're good people working great recovery programs. And again, thank you so much for your time. So I'll go ahead and give this back on over to
Mark. And thank you so much, Jackie. We appreciate your sharing your personal story and your perspective on this important topic. And back to you, Mark.
Well, I'm very grateful to Jackie, and I thought that was an excellent presentation. I especially appreciate the narrative of how she got into trouble. And as I've said to the federal authorities, until America is really given a better education about how you get into trouble with opioids, and until America is given an understanding of how the 3 federally approved medications can be used successfully, we're still going to have questions of stigma, people not wanting to go into treatment. And you certainly heard that from what Jackie was saying. So Jackie, thank you very much. To the audience, once Samantha completes her presentations, then Marcia will open up for questions. So now let me introduce Samantha Rule, who was originally raised in Rochester, New York, and has lived in Clearwater, Florida with her husband for the past 6 years. She certainly prefers the heat to the cold of the New York area. Samantha's addiction to opioid began like others, just as you heard from what Jackie said, beginning with prescriptions, pills, opioids, and eventually switching to heroin. This is a common tale. What is now more dire is it's not heroin that people will switch to, it's fentanyl, which, as Jackie pointed out, is far more potent. Her dad helped her get admitted to a methadone treatment program in 2016, and she's been in recovery since that time. Samantha has been able to successfully partner with her dad in the power washing business and is certainly a productive member of society. So, like Jackie, I am grateful to Samantha for her willingness to tell her story as well. And so now I turn it over to Samantha.
And Samantha, if you want to put your video on.
Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction. Jackie, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I should have gone first. But yes, anyways, my name is Samantha Rule. I was born and raised in Rochester, New York. I definitely had a normal, even idyllic childhood on the surface. Both my parents are still together. I have 2 sisters, one 10 years older, one 4 years younger. Like all families, obviously we had our issues. Depression and other mental illness runs rampant on my mom's side of the family. But things were mostly pretty great. I played sports from a super young age and quickly realized I was blessed with tons of natural ability, which I loved, and I definitely decided not to waste. Being an athlete quickly became who I was. It became everything. I was the son my father always wanted. I played travel soccer year round for about 10 years. And then on top of that, in school, in the fall, I ran cross country. In the winter, I played volleyball. I also skied recreationally. Never played basketball because I wasn't naturally good at it, so I didn't like it. It didn't come easy. And then in the spring, I added softball to the mix. I did this for years until I couldn't anymore. My first knee surgery was when I was 14 years old. It was botched. That led to my second and third knee surgeries. And I ended up with debilitating arthritis at the very young age of 16. My athletic career was over before it even began. before I was even finished with high school. This changed my entire identity, right at the perfect time for mental illness to kick in as well. However, for years, I took my prescriptions responsibly. I could make one script last an entire year, literally only taking it, if over-the-counter drugs weren't doing the trick. After high school, I did go away to college like I always planned, but without sports, I realized making friends was really hard for me to do. My depression worsened. I gained a bunch of weight. I was still eating the same way as when I was busy and active all the time. I think food actually ended up being my first addiction, unfortunately. I begged my parents to let me come home. I was miserable all the time. I didn't leave my dorm room. They made me finish out the year, which I'm grateful for. I'm glad I finished the year at least before coming home. I did continue my education at the local community college, but my heart wasn't in it. I already felt like a failure. I felt hopeless. I ended up getting a couple of restaurant jobs. And before I knew it, I was making friends and feeling good and fitting in again. I don't know how many people are aware of restaurant culture, but it involves going out to the bar every night after your shift and drinking. And so, yeah, that's a great way to make friends. My pill problem wasn't a problem until it was. And then it was like a light switch. Not only did they allow me to work doubles pain-free, but they also made my mood improve 1,000%. I wasn't getting treated for my depression. So like Jackie said, it made me comfortable in my own skin. And then, yeah, your tolerance goes up and up. Suddenly I couldn't work unless I had pills. I started stealing from my dad has back issues and has had a prescription pretty much my whole life. I started stealing from his supply to supplement my own. I'll never forget the first time my supply ran out and I couldn't get any from my dad, and I learned about withdrawals. I had no idea what was happening. I just knew that I was sicker than I'd ever been in my entire life. Everything hurt, even my mind. My bones felt like they were breaking, and my legs were so restless that sleep was impossible. So on top of feeling this excruciating pain and illness, I couldn't even sleep it away. It was my now husband at this point who informed me what was happening to me, informed me about withdrawals, and that I was dependent on the opiates. This started the cycle that I would be on for years, the endless merry-go-round. My first priority became to make sure I had enough medicine to not be sick. As prescriptions came harder and harder to come by, and my dad caught on to what I was doing, I had to get more manipulative and sneaky to get them from him, but it became harder. I was sick more than I wasn't. Enter heroin. Cheaper and easier to find. I thought my problems were solved naively. I was like, oh, this is great. I can make this last, a long time. I'll get through my workday. I'll be a functioning addict. I'm okay. I'm an addict, but I'm okay with it. I'm functioning. It's fine. I will say though, it took me a really long time to actually do that first bag that I got. I must have stared at it crying for about 2 hours. I knew how momentous it was to finally cross that line. Even though I had been doing drugs for years, heroin just felt like a bigger deal. It was a big deal. However, eventually wanting to feel better won out, and I did do that first bag. Everything is kind of a blur from there. I never could make it last through my full work day. Eventually I just quit the restaurants because it was becoming hard on my body, and honestly, the opiates that had once made me energetic and lively and good at my job, eventually I just wanted to be lazy and enjoy the high and not do anything. So I got a lower key job working in a doctor's office. But eventually even that, I spent every lunch shift figuring out how I could go score more drugs to get through the rest of the day. because without it, suddenly my anxiety was skyrocketing and I couldn't deal with coworkers, let alone patients. So before I knew it, I couldn't hold a job at all anymore. And I ended up fully immersed in a culture that I never thought I would see up close. Like I said, you know, idyllic childhood, upper middle class, no idea what withdrawals were the first time I had them. So yeah, I was definitely naive and I was learning a lot. I was luckier than a lot because I had assets. So I didn't have to steal. I didn't have to do some of the things that I would have done if I had to. I had a car, I had an extra room, and I had tons of stuff. So started out giving rides. Then it started out, you know, then I was doing deliveries for my dealer, you know, letting people stay in my extra room, unsafe people that should never have been allowed anywhere near anyone in my family, myself included, putting myself in very dangerous situations. My husband doing the best he could to kind of, he you know, he wanted to get me help, but didn't know how. I'm very stubborn, Taurus at heart. But anyway, yeah. So like I said, I had my car to make money, give people rides, could make deliveries. I tried quitting every single day though. Every night I went to bed. I'm not going to do this again tomorrow. I'm not going to do it again tomorrow. And every morning I woke up sick, anxious, and looking to do it again. Unfortunately, I then met a friend who told me I was wasting my money and my drugs by snorting. I let her start shooting me up. Another line crossed. Things obviously got worse and more desperate from there. Our house went from full and homey, almost to the point of cluttered, to almost completely empty, as pawning became my new hobby. Lying to my husband about where his tools went, that my friend must have stolen and pawned them, when really I knew it was me doing it. I still feel really guilty about a lot of that stuff, obviously. But even when things were at their worst and most hopeless, I still realized that I was luckier than most. I still did have a wonderful support system. With my husband in the hospital with MRSA, he has rheumatoid arthritis, so his immune system is highly suppressed. I realized how much he really had been keeping me in check, because with him in the hospital out of my way, that was my last, like, no holds barred. Now I was with that friend that was shooting me up all day, every day. No more keeping me in check. I knew in my heart of hearts that it wouldn't be long before I took that one more chance that I wouldn't be able to come back from. I was either going to overdose and die, which honestly at the time I welcomed, or I was going to end up in trouble with the law, driving around with drugs, taking this friend to dates, doing all sorts of horrible things. I was going to end up with a consequence I couldn't come back from. I went to my dad and told him exactly how bad it had gotten, and I asked him for help. We got in and had me set up at the clinic that very next day. I didn't know what to expect, but I was a little nervous because I did know of all the stigma. That friend who had been, you know, with me shooting up, I tried to get her to come with me to get help as well. She scoffed at the idea of using methadone. I didn't care though. I had tried every other way to no avail, and I was tired. Like Jackie said, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I was not prepared to end up with a permanent consequence from my addiction. I'm not saying it was magic, but I knew almost immediately that this was different. This wasn't like all those other times I tried white knuckling. Even at the 30 milligrams that they started me at for induction, I felt better. Between the counselor at the clinic and the doctor at the clinic, they were both just so amazing and optimistic, but realistic at the same time, that instilled that in me. And suddenly my empty toolbox was filling up, with the months, with the more I invested in the treatment and recovery. I think that's when I truly learned you get what you put into it. You get out of it what you put into it. So I was there for it. I was, like I said, filling up my toolbox, learning things that I had suppressed about my childhood that, you know, were hard to face, but were really important for my recovery. Like I said, the clinic was amazing. Since then, I still have the same counselor, and the same doctor at that clinic. And I'm on a stable dose. I have, you know, I only have to go twice a month now. I have my take homes, and I haven't looked back, honestly. I've been, I mean, things haven't been perfect. Like I said, it wasn't magic, but it helps my chronic pain. And it makes it so I no cravings. I can live my life. I can do things that I never thought I would be able to handle. I have plans to go back to school. And like Mark said, my dad and I started a pressure washing business. I'm not gonna lie, I was very nervous about the first time going to work because I hadn't worked without a substance in so long that I was afraid it was going to be really triggering, that I would feel like I couldn't work without using. But since being stable, I haven't even thought about it. So my father and I have been successful with that. We've grown closer than ever. I've earned trust back with my husband and the rest of my family. And I'm just, for the first time, really hopeful for the future and really excited. And Methadone gave that back to me. So thank you so much for listening to me. Mark, Marsha, everyone, thank you for doing what you're doing. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much, Samantha. It was very enlightening for all of the people attending today. We so much appreciate it. And Mark, did you want to put your video back on? And John, and anything, Mark, before we go to the next section?
Well, you know, listen, you have a perfect opportunity to ask questions of both our speakers. You should note the sort of consistency and how they talk about what happened before they entered a treatment that worked. And keep in mind that while methadone maintenance treatment is considered the gold standard of care in treating opioid use disorder, both here and abroad, there are 2 other federally approved medications. I would underscore that from our association's point of view, and in talking with many judges and other representatives from the justice system, medication is generally most effective when combined with other therapies. You heard both Jackie and Samantha talk about their work with counselors, because the medication alone is not able to get to the issues, whether it's trauma or depression or anxiety disorders or other comorbidities. So it's very important to understand that treatment is most effective when we're really meeting the patient where they happen to be. And it's not the issue of imposing care on patients, it's working with the patient each step of the way during their own evolution in treatment. And you clearly heard about that evolution from both of them. So once again, I'm grateful. You should know their stories are not unusual. As I said earlier, I spent 18 years of my professional life working in an OTP, starting in 1974. And I very much enjoyed my time in working directly with patients. It's how I built my respect for them. And also, I never anticipated that I would spend the rest of my career doing this. So I would only say that because I saw the success of the patients, how well they did, and I was really, as I said, quite impressed. And that's continued to the present time. So with that, I know I would have questions, but I will leave that to you, to Marcia and John to field those. But again, I think you've been given a rich opportunity to hear their stories.
Well, thank you. And John, did you want to kick it off with the first question? And for our audience, feel free to go to the Q&A area. If you don't see it, you'll need to move your cursor to the bottom of the screen, and then it will show Q&A, and click on it and just type your questions in there. So
Okay, and we had two questions submitted to Jackie that Jackie answered in the Q&A, but I don't know if everybody sees that. We've been doing Zoom now for 16 months and I still can't remember. But Jackie, would you mind, there were two questions, both from Jeffrey Lewis. One was, how important was self-esteem in your recovery? Which you provided a written answer. Would you mind answering that just verbally for the whole group here?
Sure, absolutely. So Jeffrey Lewis asked, oh, that was the next part. So he said, how important was self-esteem in your recovery? And then I answered, self-esteem is paramount. But unfortunately, for me personally, I'm just now able to say that I love the woman that I've become. I never even liked myself, hence the self-medicating and my love affair with opiates. Working the 12 steps combined with group individual therapy, peer support, and a solid recovery program coupled with medication is my foundation for a solid recovery program, is what I wrote. But as far as, self-esteem, it kind of goes out the window when you're in active addiction. I mean, I didn't take a shower for a week at a time. I didn't, it really, really, really is paramount. And that it comes in time. Once you get into recovery and you start getting stable and you start working your steps and you start learning about this disease called addiction, you begin to build your self-esteem. And then the second question was also, do you expect a time will come where methadone is not needed to sustain sobriety? And then I answered, every recovery pathway is different for everybody. It's just as unique as you are. For me, maybe, possibly a time may come where I may begin a very slow, steady taper, but it is not something that I worry about or is in the forefront of my recovery plan. Due to my chronic back pain, my high tolerance for opiates, and about 100,000 other reasons, I may take methadone forever, and that's okay too. Diabetics may need insulin forever, and that's okay too. Methadone or medication is only one small part of recovery.
thank you. And as we're waiting for additional questions to come in, I'm going to kind of interview both of you a little bit. And so whoever feels like answering, then please do. And if you care to share on this, it kind of dovetails with the first question that you answered. What's something good or something great that you learned about yourself in the process of this experience that you've shared?
For myself or Samantha or?
Either one, whoever would like to go.
Oh, go ahead, Samantha.
For myself, I would just say that, like I said, for me, doing things was such a bit, like being an athlete was such a huge part of who I was. It's been nice to realize that wasn't actually that important. Like, it was a piece of who I was, but it wasn't my worth. And so for me, a big part was discovering my worth, without things that I could do for people or or give people, or, you know, I don't know if I'm saying that clearly, but just finding my own worth without placing everything, you know, all my eggs in one basket, so to speak, hinging everything on one thing.
So did you experience perhaps a shift in beliefs about yourself and who you were as a person?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty fundamental to changing your identity, from being an addict or a user to being a human and a very worthwhile person who deserves to have a very good life.
And to feel that I do deserve a good life is just an amazing feeling.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, here's a question for both panelists. Can you talk about your support network and how it has changed throughout your recovery?
Well, my support network is phenomenal because I work with a bunch of certified peer support specialists, licensed mental health counselors, and a substance abuse treatment center. So I literally turn any corner and there's support. Between that, I go to online meetings, and I like to share my story with new clients as well, to help them in their recovery. So my support system is very strong, and I continually read the big book and daily reflections. So.
And mine is also very strong and very consistent. I'm very lucky to have the support of my family. And then in addition, like I said, I've had the same counselor through my entire treatment. And online, I found a lot of support as well. Actually, how I came to be part of this talk was through one of, you know, a methadone recovery group on Facebook. So yeah, same, very, very consistent and very strong support.
So that's a really important point, because there are certainly people out there who don't have the kind of support system that you've both mentioned and may even be alone. And so, you know, if you could comment a little bit further on that online resource that anybody can reach out to.
Oh yeah. Facebook has tons of groups. Pro MAT, there's some specifically for buprenorphine, there's specifically for Vivitrol, specifically for methadone, or all three. Facebook is a phenomenal resource. Social media has tons of support groups that support. You can go on there any day and say, hey, I'm having a rough day. You know, I need some support. Hey, I feel like relapsing. Hey, you know, I changed my dose, or any and everything medication assisted treatment related. We can go on there and support one another.
And I'd like to add, like, as soon as you do that, literally seconds later, you'll have a million comments of that support that we talked about from other people in the group, just cheering you on, or keeping you, you know, reminding you of what you're doing this for.
And resources, they provide resources. Hey, I'm going on vacation to Florida. Do you know of any OTPs there? Which ones do you recommend? And so we can share our stories, or, you know, and how do we file a grievance? How do we, you know, so things like that are unique to methadone patients.
So there are no doubt many people out there in the situation of struggling with addiction and struggling with treatment and staying, you know, being in recovery and so forth. But if they don't have anyone in their support system, they may not think of social media as being meaningful to them. But from what you've described, all they have to do is try it out and then see that there is that love and support and all these resources out there at the push of a button. And
absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. John?
All right, we have lots of questions. I'll start with this one, and then there's some that are related. This is for both panelists. Do either of you have another pathway of recovery? Meaning, do you go to NA meetings? Do you have a sponsor? Do you continually work the 12 steps?
I do, yes. I don't have a sponsor, but I read the big book with my old coworker in Jacksonville. We meet once a week and we just go and read the big book, and we kind of, I guess you could say she's a sponsor unofficially. She has the ability to sponsor, but because we were coworkers, we decided not to make it official. But we do, but yeah, I do read the big book, so. I use many modalities, as well as peer support, as well as I have a therapist, you know, so I have tons and tons of other recovery support.
Yeah, I was gonna say mine is layered as well. I don't necessarily have a sponsor or do the meetings, but on top of, you know, staying active at my clinic, I also make sure I keep a watch on my mental health separately as well. I have a separate therapist, and that way I'm keeping my depression and anxiety in check on top of everything else, which is a big part of keeping my sobriety.
One of you spoke about pregnancy and varied results with 2 children, and someone is asking a question that has several parts to it, but overall the subject about pregnancy and MHE and the support of doctors and what kind of support was received, and explaining the process and the impacts and so forth. And then they ask about any involvement with DCF, the Department of Children and Families, related to methadone and pregnancy. So if either of you have any comment on that kind of mix of topics, then now's the time.
I had 2 very, very different experiences. I had an incredibly stigmatizing, traumatizing experience where the nurses wouldn't even make eye contact with me, were just rude and awful, and treated me like absolute crap. And that was with the child that my firstborn, who didn't require any type of medications, and he did not experience any kind of withdrawal symptoms. And DCF, as far as DCF's involvement, they come and interview you once baby's born. They do a drug screen, see that the medication is prescribed, you are involved in a treatment program, and that's it. So there's no open case per se, unless they have reason to believe that there's other drugs involved or you're not able to provide a healthy, stable environment. And I was a homeowner, you know, so that wasn't an issue in my case. It did not cause me to relapse. Absolutely. Seeing my baby having withdrawal-like symptoms. Luckily, the worst my second born did experience. He was there for 4 weeks. And the worst that we saw was rigid and crying. And they're very subjective symptoms, but we just were extra precautious. So as far as consoling, it was interesting because the lack of knowledge and the lack of experience from one nurse to the other. So one nurse would tell me, don't breastfeed that baby. It goes through methadone, goes through the breast milk. You're going to keep giving it to him and make him worse. Other nurses will say, breastfeed him as much as possible. Yes, it passes through the breast milk, but it actually can help him through his tapering process because he's getting such small amounts. So after much research and talking to many doctors, breastfeeding was the best thing to do. So I breastfed as a way to console, and he was given medications. He never shook or, you know, like those awful videos. I don't know if you've ever seen them. He was never like that. And there's no reason a baby should ever get to that point because there are medications that can help. He was given phenobarbital and morphine and very super low doses. And it was 4 weeks because they do such a slow taper at such low doses. And I was breastfeeding. But yeah, it was the worst feeling. I felt like the worst human being on the planet. It was awful. It was awful. But I knew that it was the best choice at that time. because you cannot detox while you're pregnant. The baby could potentially have a seizure and die in utero. So the only option is to be on medication-assisted treatment. And so that was my choice to do for my baby's life. So that was my experience with my babies. And then after having a cesarean with my second baby, I was not given any pain medication. So the epidural wore off, and I was feeling, I'd just been cut open and had a baby taken out of me. I was at a stable dose of methadone. There was not even a frickin' Tylenol. Nobody gave me anything. And one of the nurses actually said, well, you're on methadone. That's one of the strongest, opiates there is. How are you feeling pain? So that's what I mean as far as the ignorance and I hate to use that word, meaning the uneducation. They weren't educated about how methadone works. Yes, I'm a stable, but that's my baseline. That's my normal. That is not pain killing effects. So I had to writher in pain for a good 3 hours before my doctor was finally gotten a hold of, and I was able to finally get a morphine pump after being cut open for a cesarean. So the stigma has caused me literally severe physical, emotional pain. So, it's education is key. And us sharing our stories, I think, really helps with that. So.
And I would inject a note here, Marcia and John, in that what Jackie is describing is unfortunately quite typical. This is why patients are reasonably reluctant to tell of their involvement in methadone treatment to medical professionals, because you never know what you're going to get back. And even in my experience as a young clinician in the 1970s, when one of our patients gave birth and I went over with nursing staff to deliver medication, methadone, because the hospital didn't have it on its formulary, and we had to transfer it into the nursing station. And I was visiting the patient when the nurse came in and took the bottle and threw it at the mom's stomach to say, here, you can feed this poison to your baby. So you can't underestimate the power of stigma, the impact that it has on providing medical care to patients. And I've dealt with a number of child welfare workers and such, and child protection services groups. That education varies too, from one state to another or one region to another. So, what Jackie is saying is quite right. The reality here is that you have to consistently educate, and don't for a moment think that medical professionals simply understand this. They need to be educated. So I just wanted to insert that.
Yeah. I mean, I've literally been laughed. I've working in the ER next to ER physicians and nurses. When I first started working there, they didn't know I was in recovery, and they certainly didn't know I was on medication-assisted therapy. So all they knew was I was there to help people, the junkies is what they would call them. So they were so stigmatizing that they would say, hey, Jackie, we got a crack monkey in room 3 for you. Or, hey, Jackie, we got meth heads in room 4. Oh, crackheads here for you in room 10. So it was so bad. And I finally, instead of getting angry and upset, I would say, listen, when we finally calmed down, quieted down, I said, hey, listen, can I tell you my story? And they would sit down and I tell them my story. And after they picked their job off the ground, I never would have guessed in a million years you took methadone. Oh my God. When are you going to get off it? And why are you taking it? And oh my God. So then I had to explain, what it's for, how it works, the pharmacology, the history of it, the whole nine. And a lot of times people were I guess they just have this image of people who take methadone are just like the Walking Dead looking people, or, And I jokingly say that because I mean, literally people really think that sometimes, unfortunately. So it was an incredible opportunity to be amongst doctors and nurses in the ER working 12-hour shifts and being able to share my story and helping. And they saw the end result where I got to take them to detox and I'd follow up with them. And yeah, they're still in recovery and they're still doing great. So that was an incredible opportunity. Any chance I have to help even just one individual learn or help them recover or help change stigma, I'm all about. I am there.
There are people who have put comments in asking if they can call upon you in the future. So that fits right with what you just said. John?
Anytime.
That's
Well, on the
wonderful.
topic of stigma associated with methadone, we have a question regarding NA meetings, AA meetings, and that issue of being judged for being on methadone in those settings.
Yeah.
Any experience with this personally, as well as with any peers that you work with?
I lost a friend of mine because of her sharing her MAT status. We were at a meeting when we were in residential treatment. We went to outside NA meeting. An old timer. She had shared her story, shared that she was on, I think she was on Suboxone at the time. So she told her story. An old timer in the back stands up and he says, honey, you're not clean. You are not in recovery and you are not clean. All this clean time you're here claiming, go put your chip back. It is all negated. You are not in clean. You're not in recovery. You need to get off that crap and then come back and talk to us. It shook her so bad that everybody there, nobody would sponsor her from that meeting. She ended up hurrying up, quickly tapering in a miserable, withdrawing fashion. She, of course, was still withdrawing and miserable, so she relapsed and died. So Destiny's dead because of it, because of stigma, and because she has children. She had a family. Her name's Destiny, and she's dead because of stigma. So,
Sorry for your loss.
yeah. So stigma is tough, and there's some meetings are phenomenal, and some meetings they go by the book literally, because the book states we have no affairs when it comes to your medical treatment. They are not allowed to give medical advice or discuss your medical treatment. So that's between you and your physician and your pharmacist. So any medications that you're taking, I'm not going to ask you about your cholesterol and your statins. I'm not going to ask you about your, Zoloft and your Prozac. It's none of my business. But if we do want to discuss it, I would at least be supportive. That it's the least I could do. Well, I'm glad you're having that conversation with your doctor. I wish you the best, period. I'm not a physician. I'm not going to tell you what you need and need not to take. So some meetings are great. Others aren't, unfortunately.
It's important to note that the whole theme is about education, and the groups that are out there as support groups, some of them and some individuals like you spoke of need to be educated as well. There are many groups out there and the NA is a best practice for drug courts, and there are many out there that are doing good work.
Yeah.
And provide support, but at the same time, you have individuals like you named that are doing a disservice. We are getting tight on our time, and we have a lot of questions pending. I'm going to throw one out that is from a judge here, and we have a few announcements at the end. As a judge presiding in drug court, what do you think are the most important things we can do to motivate people to get clean?
I think a big part of that is something as simple as not showing judgment, as believing in them as believing that they're worthy of recovery, and not showing that judgment, like they're not worth it. I think people already feel so worthless on their own when they're at that point, that one more person putting them down, is no big deal. But one person that doesn't is a huge deal, and can be very encouraging and can maybe flip that switch for them.
We need bed availability. That's huge. Our barriers to treatment are awful. So we need beds, we need harm reduction education, and we need to give access to any treatment modality, whether it be methadone, Suboxone, Vivitrol, abstinence, faith, whatever they fits them, then let's do it, you know. And peers are your ace up your sleeve. Peers have lived it, they know it, and clients will respond to a peer completely differently than they would other people, people without lived experience, because they know that they get it. You know, they're not going to be judged, they're not going to be stigmatized, and I'm going to say, hey, I've been in your shoes, I get it, you know. So peers are your superpower.
Excellent.
Well,
John?
thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Mark. Samantha and Jackie, I would invite you to look at the chat feed. There's tons of encouraging comments based on both of your presentations. I'm going to hand it over to you, Marcia, for closing comments.
All righty, great. Well, and we're sorry for those that we didn't get to the questions, that we have a lot of questions both in chat and in the Q&A area. I'm going to quickly go over to the slides and go down to the announcement section here. And give me 1 second. Slide. And well, are you seeing my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
For some reason, it's not allowing me to show it in the full screen view. It's only showing it with the side section. It's not the end of the world. Let me just try again. All right, it will allow me to start it at the very top. So I'm going to go down. Well, no, it's still not, but it's not the end of the world. Okay, so final announcements in our last little bit of time is that September is Florida Opioid and Stimulant Use Disorder Awareness Month, and our circuit champions around the state are doing work to create awareness, as are we, on these important topics. And so stay tuned for activities to come. And we hope that you'll all also play a leadership role in creating further awareness as has been created today through this program. And September is also National Recovery Month. So a lot of things going on in sync with each other to really raise awareness of the issues and the needs and what can be done. Also, we have upcoming events, and if you go to our website, you can't click on that link there, and so I put flcourts.org, and then if you just put opioids in, it'll bring you to the page. If you put events in or opioid events in, you'll come to our events and links to where you can sign up for those, and you can see 3 of them. And the next one is August 9th with Tall Cup, who is known nationally for his expertise on the latest drug trends, and he also has some insights on Florida specifically from having visited here and gone around and behind the scenes. He has discovered quite a bit. And then kudos to our presenters, of course. We so much appreciate your stories, your sincerity, your willingness to share on such personal matters, and we hope that is reinforcing to you as well. And this has been a very valuable program. And we will be asking for those who have attended today, if you would please respond to our email that will be coming out a few minutes after we close, to ask for your feedback on the program. That's very helpful to us. And we thank everyone for your participation, and thank Mark certainly for leading this session and bringing Samantha and Jackie to the program. So that's it for me. John, anything else?
Oh, thanks. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks and goodbye. And we're going to leave this up for just a moment. I'm going to go back to the event one in case anybody wants to note anything down.
Thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. And I didn't ask Mark if you had anything else, but go for it if you do. Thank you, Samantha and Jackie.
Thank you so much.
All right, right on time. Thanks again, everyone.
Mhm.